In this video, we are going to build a dark mode scrolling animation with Framer Motion, Tailwind, and Next.js, something that you might have seen on some of Apple's product pages. And so you can see here in this demo, we have a page that is clearly in a sort of light mode with white background and dark text. But as I scroll down to kind of the next section here, you can see the whole page transitions to a dark mode. So now a dark background with light text. And now if I scroll back up, it transitions back to light mode. To get started, go ahead and download the starter code using the link in the description down below. Make sure to run npm install to get all the dependencies, and let's get into it. Here we have the starter code for this project. It's just a simple one-page website built using Next.js and styled with Tailwind. So you can see on the left, this is the starter project after just running npm run dev. And you can see on the right, most of our work is going to happen in the just index.tsx file. And the only thing to call out here is in the public folder, there are a couple of images under assets that will be helpful as we build out this project. So let's start with building the content and the structure of the site. And then we'll get into the dark mode styling and the animations as well on scroll. Let's go into the index.tsx file and let's start replacing this placeholder text. Now, as you might remember from the demo, each section is going to cover the full screen of whatever is visible. And we're going to have two columns of content, some text on the left and an image on the right. So for this, we're going to use CSS grid to get those two columns, and we will use flex to make the entire section full screen. So let's start by building out the full screen section. So for this, I will create a section tag. Inside this section, I'm going to give it a few classes. So for now, we'll just set the background to be white, give it a padding of 8, set the min height to be the full height of the screen. I'm also going to throw in flex and flex column. We'll see later on this will come in handy for positioning some of the content. If I hit save, we don't see anything. That's because the background here is white. So if I change it to say something like yellow, it takes up the full height as we want. For now, I'll just leave it as yellow. We'll change it back in a second just so we can visualize all this. So now inside, we can start putting some of the content in here. So first, I'm going to put a single div. This div, I'm going to add some class names here. I'm going to give it flex1. This is going to allow the content inside to take full advantage of the full height that we've set for this section already. So that's what flex1 is doing, and that's why we had set this flex call on the section tag. So set that to be flex1, and then I'll add a flex to this div as well for all of its children. Flex column, justify center. This is so we can, all the content will kind of be centered in the page, in this section, even though it's smaller than this full yellow rectangle. We're going to give a max width on larger screens for the content, just so we have some nice spacing on the left and the right. And of course, we need to give a margin max of auto so that it centers horizontally. So now this is where we're going to build out the two column layout for our content. So I'll throw another div in here. In this, we're going to use CSS grid. We are going to want to make this responsive. And so actually, kind of best practice here is your default class name should be how you want the content to look like on a small screen, on a mobile screen. And then we'll use these query prefixers to set how we want, like LG or medium, to set how we want that to change for larger screens. So on the smallest screens, we're actually going to want to stack all of the content in one column. So I'll say grid calls 1. But on, let's say, medium screens, we'll want to change the columns to a 2-column layout. By default, Tailwind has these preset. And let's say if I said grid calls 2, this would set up 2 columns, each of the same size. So it'll be a 50-50 split of the columns. In this case, we don't want it to be 50-50. We actually want to give a little bit more space to the image to make it a little bit bigger. So I'm just going to put a manual override value, which I can do by putting these square brackets in. And I'm going to say 2FR, 3FR. So this will make the first column 40% of the width and the second column the remaining 60% of the width. And then finally, I will add a gap of 8. So there's a spacing between the columns. Okay, so that set up our grid. So now we can set up our content here. There's going to be 2 columns, right? One for text content on the left and then one for the image on the right. Let's first throw the text all into a div. And for the text, we are going to set some classes here. So we're going to use flex. We want it to be vertically stacked. So flex call. We'll do a vertical spacing of 8. And we'll do justify center here. All right, so now we can actually start putting some of the content. So I'm going to put an h1 tag. And let me just copy in this content. So if I hit save, we can start to see, okay, here's the content finally. And let me go ahead and just replace this background back to white. So now let's add some classes here. So I'm going to make this bigger. So let's say 5XL. On large screens, let's set this, on super large screens, let's set the text to be even larger. So 7XL. So you can see large screen, it's pretty big. But if I shrink this, it will become smaller. We're going to make the font bold. And we're going to just make sure that the text is actually a black color. So then underneath this header, we're going to want some descriptive text, let's call it. So we'll wrap this all in a p tag and we'll set some classes here. We'll set the font size here to just be large. We'll do semi-bold. And we'll use the CSS colors from Tailwind to this sort of gray color of zinc. We then can copy in some more text. And boom, we have some content here. I'm going to add one more thing here, which is going to be a kind of subtitle inside of a span. So here I would just say pro accessories, and I will put a empty space as well. So if I save, you can see pro accessories, but styled the same right now as the rest of the content. So I'm going to throw in some specific styling on the span. Specifically, we'll make it black. And then boom. Now it's kind of a nice inline subtitle, which is I think pretty nice subtle effect here. Great. So that's all of the text. So now let's add finally the image. So let's find the right div tag here. We'll add another div. Now we're going to use Next image to load in the image and make it all optimized. If you worked with Next image before, you might know it's sometimes a bit annoying to size it correctly, just given the way that component works. So what I'm going to do here is I'm first going to make a div that we'll use to set the size we want for the image. So I'm going to do a class name of relative so that the image is contained actually in this div. I'll say width of full, which in this case is the full width of the column that this is living in. And for the height, I'm just going to set this to 40 rem manually, again, by using the square bracket overrides. And now inside this div, I'm going to pull in the next image component. And here we can just do a direct closing tag. And now inside of here, we can do the properties. So the source, which sits in our assets folder. Here's, let's use section 1 image. It wants an alt tag for great accessibility. So we'll put this in. We'll set a value of fill, which will help tell it how we want it to size. So fill the container. And then finally, I'm going to provide a custom style tag here so we can set the object fit here to contain so it doesn't look weird as it scales up. So if I hit save, so the image loads in, kind of is nicely sized. And the nice thing we can do is if I shrink this, we notice 2 things. So one, you actually notice right here that the text size changes actually a little bit. It's a little bit subtle, but the text size changes. And then if I keep going down, there we go. It collapses to 1 column. There we go. So you can see the text size changes there as well. Great. So that's one section. We are going to now make the second section, which is pretty much a copy paste here. If we were kind of doing this at scale, I think we definitely would want to move this out into a separate component. But for the sake of this project, and given there's only 2 copies, I'm just going to copy and paste. Even just from copy pasting, you can see if I scroll down, you can see there's a second section already, which is a full screen height. So now let me just swap in some of these values. So the image is now going to be section 2. So that's the second image is swapped in. Now let's swap in the title, the subtitle, and the content as well. I think I accidentally overwrote the title with the subtitle. And with that, we have both content sections all laid out. So with that, we have all of the content and structure complete. So now let's talk about using dark mode with Tailwind. And if we go to the Tailwind documentation, which I will also leave a link in the description for, there's a nice page here talking all about dark mode. And so if we look here and just look down pretty quickly, we'll notice it's as simple as adding just this dark prefix to whatever classes that you want to apply while the website is in a dark mode. By default, we can use this dark prefix, but these will only be enabled based on the system settings for dark mode. However, there are ways, if we scroll down a little bit, to set dark mode manually. And there's a few different ways to do it. The way we're going to do it here is by setting a custom class name on the parent, which will then tell Tailwind to enable dark mode stylings or to not. You can see here in the Tailwind config, we just need to add this property here to tell it, hey, use the classes for dark mode. And then we can simply add the dark class to, let's say, the parent, and that will toggle on dark mode. So let's first go into the Tailwind config and set this up. So at the bottom here, we'll just say dark mode, set the class. And then now we can use dark mode styling. So let me actually add a dark mode styling here, for example, on the section. So I'm going to say in dark, I actually want the background to be black instead. So if I go back, nothing obviously happened. But let's say, for example, I now add a class name of dark to this parent div and watch what happens. Boom. It automatically set it to be the dark mode styling. Now you'll notice obviously a lot of this other stuff now you can't see anymore. So let's go ahead and quickly fix that. This H1, we need to set a dark styling of text white. So now we can see that again. For this subtitle span, we're going to say text white here as well. The nice thing about the zinc color is it, I think, works pretty nicely actually, both in light and dark mode. So I'm just going to leave that as is. And now if I take off dark, boom, it switches back to light mode. So let me quickly go ahead and just add these styles to the second section as well. Okay, so I've just gone ahead and just copied down the styles. So now if I go back up and manually switch to dark, this is working. If I scroll down, these styles have also flowed in nicely as well. Now, I did say that we're going to kind of leave the copy paste here of the two sections, even though they're quite similar. But I am going to do one thing. I'm going to abstract out section tag to its own component, because the next thing we need to do now is figure out how we're going to set this dark mode based on scrolling. And now, because that logic, I'll self-contain it in a component, so we don't have to repeat all the tracking for every single section. I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder, components. Make a new component called, I'll just call it section.tsx. Emit for creating a new component. And in this component, I'm going to do a couple of things. First, I'm going to update this return statement. So it's going to be, I'm going to copy this section tag, paste it in here. So then the styling comes in. If I were to swap this out now, section, of course it's going to complain, but let's say if I swap it here, it keeps the styling, but it of course gets rid of all of our content, which is not what we want. That's because we need to tell this component that we want to keep all of the children components. So let me just swap it for the second one. All right, so now going back to the section component, I'm going to go to the definition, set it to be a type React functional component, and I need to give it what properties, some explicit properties here. So specifically for now, let's just set a children property, which has type React node. And then inside of this section component in the return or section tag, we'll just pass the children in. And it doesn't like it because we need to destructure the props explicitly. And then boom, there we go. We have our content back. Okay, so let me go and now get rid of this dark class name. And actually what we're going to do is we're going to set up a state to track what the theme should be for the website, so light or dark mode. So I'm going to say theme, set theme equals, I'm going to use useState. And originally I'm going to set this to be light by default. And then for this div, for the class name, I will set this equal to whatever theme is. Right now it's light. If I switch this, the default to be dark, if I save, you can see it passes it in. So now we have the ability to kind of manually toggle this. So now I want the ability to do two things. One is I want to assign each section a specific theme it should use. So for example, I want this first section to be in light, but the second section to be in the dark mode. And then second, I also want the ability to control this theme switching from the component itself when we set up the scrolling. So for that, we need to do a couple of things. We need to add a couple of properties to pass through into section. So I'm going to set a property called theme type string. And then I'm going to also have it take a set theme function here that takes a value, a string here, and doesn't have a return value. And then let me just add these as things we can destructure. And then back here in these section components, let's add these. So for the first one, the theme should be light. And set theme is just going to be the set theme function from our state setting here. And then if I just copy this down here, I'm going to set theme here to be dark instead. So right now, this is not doing anything because we're not actually doing any switching here in the components. But now let's do that. So we're going to go into the section and we're going to, again, do this based off of the scroll position. So as we scroll from section to section, that's when the whole page shifts its theme to the correct one. We are going to use Framer Motion and the scroll tracking available in Framer Motion. For this, let's do a couple of things. So first, we'll need to get a reference to the container we're going to track the scrolling of. So I'm going to say use ref. I'm going to attach the ref to this section. And then we're going to use the useScroll hook from Framer Motion. And from that, we're going to pull out the scroll progress, which will be a value from 0 to 1 or 0 to 100%. useScroll from Framer Motion. And we're going to pass in a couple of properties specifically here. So target, which is going to be the container. So by default, useScroll will track your scroll progress of the entire page. But in this case, we need to target it for this specific section component or tag here. And then I'm also going to apply an offset. In this case, we want to transition the theme once the bottom of this section is halfway up or down the page. So in this case, we want the scroll progress to be 0 when the start of this container is in the center of the page. And we want it to equal 100% when the end or bottom of the component is at the center of the page. And now we just have to worry about like scroll progress equals 0 or equals 1. Those are exactly the points when we want to do the switch. So now we need to listen for how this scroll progress value changes over time. So for that, we're going to use, again, something from Framer Motion, the use motion value event hook. This will allow us to, when I pass in scroll progress, listen for specific changes on scroll progress. In this case, I'm going to say, I'm going to listen for the change event. So whenever the value of this scroll progress changes, we're going to trigger this function, which takes the current value of scroll progress. And then I'm going to check. I'm going to say if this value is between 0 and 1, but not equal to those, that means that this specific section is on screen and kind of the active section. And so we'll want to turn on the theme that we had set for this section. So all we need to do here is just say set theme and just the theme that we have set for this section. So I hit save, and now let's scroll and see what happens. So if I scroll down, and then there you go. You can see right there. So, right, so we know like the end of this top section is like coming down, and right when it hits the middle, boom, it switches the theme of the page to because this second section is in dark mode. We'll notice that The theme switching is right now really jerky and really instant, and it's not pleasant at all because you have the backgrounds changing, you have the text color changing. So let's add a quick transition here for this animation. Because there's so many different things that are changing colors and transitioning from one state to another, let's just go ahead and apply a global style to set the transition values. So for that, I'm going to go into styles and the global.css file. Inside here, I'm just going to say for all components, I'm going to apply the transition colors property from Tailwind, and then I'm also going to apply duration of 500 milliseconds as well. Now I hit save, and now if I scroll, there we go. We have a nice half a second animation on all of the color properties of the background color and of text color as well. So with that, we have built the dark mode scrolling animation. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them down in the comments below. Also, if there are any other topics you want to see covered on the channel, let me know in the comments below. And on screen now, you'll find a link to another great tutorial for you to check out next, and I'll see you in the next video.